would like to ask the Chairman of the Manx Utilities Authority what plans Manx Utilities has to transition power generation to renewables.
On the Chairman of the Manx Utilities Authority, Dr Allenson.
Thank you, Mr President. Manx Utilities recognises that it has an important role to play in the reduction of carbon emissions on the island. I believe it has a good track record in this regard, which has included the commissioning of the hydro station at Solby, the power interconnector to the UK, the combined cycle gas turbine plant and consequent reduction in the use of heavy fuel oil, and the recent decommissioning of the fuel-oiled Ramsey power station. Manx Utilities' primary source of generation is the combined cycle gas turbine power station at Pulrose, which was designed to efficiently generate electricity from natural gas, which is much less polluting than the previous oil-fuelled generation. The power station was designed to operate through to the mid-2030s and was financed by a bond due to be paid in 2034. A planning cycle for a new major infrastructure development, such as a power station, wind farm or interconnector cable, is normally considered to be about 10 years when factoring in such things as load analysis, future technologies, environmental assessments, power system stability analysis, economics and consents. Manx Utilities is working closely with the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture and with the wider government through the Environment and Infrastructure Committee of the Council of Ministers. This includes supporting the previous climate strategy approved by Tynwald in July 2016, which focuses on energy efficiency, electrification of energy use, and then addressing power generation as the Pulrose gas power station reaches the end of its operational life. As a consequence of our climate change considerations, Manx Utilities has started to consider the options it has to continue to reliably supply energy to consumers on the Isle of Man in a way that precludes the use of fossil fuels. Such deliberations also include demand-side energy reduction, such as the introduction of smart metering, electric vehicles and heat pumps. One of the key priorities for Manx Utilities is reliability of supply, and whilst renewable energy has obvious benefits, it does not currently boast the same security capability as we currently enjoy. We are looking at how new technologies could accommodate this issue. Such technologies could be on the supply side, such as an additional interconnector, or on the demand side, such as battery storage. Manx Utilities is committed to delivering sustainable utilities for the Isle of Man through an appropriate balance between the cost of the utilities, which are paid for by its customers, the reliability of its utility services, and the environmental impact of its operations. We welcome the recent statement by the Chief Minister and will work with the rest of government and with all our customers to plan for the future. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Mrs Caine.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the MUA Chair confirm whether offshore wind farms feature in the Manx Utilities medium or long-term plans?
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. At the moment, the Department of the Environment, Food and Agriculture are processing a widespread public consultation which will determine Tynwald's agenda for how renewable energy will be provided. In the past, there have been previous comments about onshore or offshore wind generation, and as I've said in my statement, there are a lot of different factors that need to be taken account of this, including environmental factors, including planning consents. And so Manx Utilities will respond to Tynwald policy and supply electricity in the best way we know, both to secure supply, to drive costs down, but also environmentally to reduce our carbon emissions.
Mr Speaker.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll give the opportunity for the Chairman of the Manx Utilities Authority to see if he knows anything more about the offshore wind array that's coming any more than the Chief Minister does. But also, as part of the decommissioning of the combined cycle gas turbine plant in the mid-2030s, whether plans are also being put into place to decommission and remove the gas spur at the same time.
Dr Allenson.
Thank you very much, Mr President. If I can address those various issues. Manx Utilities has not been directly involved with any supplier of offshore power, to my knowledge. I am aware that there was a previous plan to base a wind array in Manx territorial waters, but it was my understanding that electricity would go to the United Kingdom rather than directly to the Isle of Man. However, in a changing environmental world that we live in at the moment with different priorities, that may now become a possibility. In terms of looking at the decommissioning of Pulrose power station, he's quite correct that part of the initiation of that whole project was to bring natural gas onto the Isle of Man. This was partly to power generation, but also obviously provide natural gas to customers through our agreements with Manx Gas. At the moment, there is no agenda to close that spur and cut it off. And as we go past the 2030s, we may need some background peak generation, perhaps provided by natural gas, to deal with sudden spikes of demand. However, one of the options that we'll be discussing later is in terms of becoming carbon neutral. So although we may still be having some CO2 emissions, we can deal with those through sequestration or actually other policies that will reduce overall our emissions to a zero figure.
Supplementary, Mrs. Caine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can the MUA Chair provide clarity whether onshore or offshore wind turbines are being actively considered by the MUA for energy generation, the timescale that we're potentially looking at if that's the case, or whether other possibilities such as tidal power are also under consideration?
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I've said, Manx Utilities are in the business of providing power, but they're not necessarily in the business of providing strategy or policy. That has to be determined by government and agreed by Tynwald. I think she's quite right that in the future, if we are going to maintain energy reliability, which has been very important, particularly for the e-gaming sector and the development of IT sector on this island, we need to have a hybrid model of production, as we do at the moment, between renewables, between gas and also diesel. In the future, I can see a matrix of wind. Whether that's onshore or offshore comes down to some of the practicalities of putting it there, and also, as I've said, environmental and planning consents, but also the role of future solar energy is very important. We are looking at the various plans in the UK which have put solar arrays floating on reservoirs. These not only produce power but also reduce the evaporation from those reservoirs, and obviously one of the other parts of Manx Utilities is in the supply of drinking water to the islands. That may be an option, and we're certainly looking into that. In terms of tidal energy, obviously there were various ideas floated in the past, and consents given for that to be explored in the south of the island that unfortunately did not come to fruition. But as we develop over the next decade, I'm sure there'll be newer technologies that we can embrace in the future to provide clean energy for this island, to give it its environmental impact that we want, but also to actually keep the costs down for the consumers while giving energy security. Thank you, Mr. President.